They say the truth arrives in the most unexpected moments. On a sweltering afternoon in the heart of Atlanta, inside the towering halls of the Fulton County Courthouse, it came from the lips of a teenage girl who wasn't even supposed to be there. The tension in the room was thick, the stakes even higher. When she stood up, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. In a single breath, she uttered two words that shattered the courtroom like a lightning strike. The judge froze. The jury turned in shock. Prosecutors sat motionless, their carefully laid case teetering on the edge of collapse. No one saw it coming. What she said next changed everything. Outside, the city hummed with life. Traffic snarled along Peachtree Street, impatient horns blaring through the heat. In the courthouse, however, the world felt still. Every eye locked onto the girl who had just thrown a wrench into the entire trial. Mina Carter, 15, braided hair pulled back, stood rooted to the spot. She hadn't planned to speak, hadn't even planned to be inside that courtroom at all. But fate had other plans. 3 months ago, her father, Jonah Carter, had been arrested for a crime he didn't commit. A burglary at a wealthy estate in the affluent neighborhood of Brookhaven had left thousands of dollars in jewelry missing. Witnesses described a figure running into the night, a tall man, dark clothing, black gloves. The security footage was grainy at best, but the police didn't care. An anonymous tip led them straight to Jonah. Mina had watched as officers stormed into their tiny apartment before dawn, flipping over furniture, rifling through drawers, tearing apart the only home she had ever known. And then they found it, a velvet pouch tucked inside the spare tire compartment of Jonah's car, containing 2 diamond bracelets reported stolen. He swore he had never seen them before. The police didn't listen. Mina had never felt so powerless. She remembered gripping her father's hand as they led him away, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Stay strong, baby girl." She had tried, but staying strong wasn't enough. Weeks passed. Lawyers made empty promises. Reporters called it an open and shut case. And Mina? She spent every waking hour combing through case files, digging through police reports, looking for anything that could prove what she already knew. Her father was innocent. That morning, she had slipped into the courthouse unnoticed, blending into the sea of bodies crammed inside courtroom 4C. She wasn't supposed to be there. No one had invited her. But she needed to see him, needed to be close, even from a distance. She watched as the prosecution laid out their case, their voices dripping with certainty. Motive, they said. Opportunity. A polished attorney, Davis Holloway, turned toward the jury, adjusting his expensive cufflinks as if the verdict had already been decided. Jonah Carter had everything to gain and nothing to lose. Mina's fists clenched. They had no idea what they were talking about. Her father was a maintenance worker at Emory University, the kind of man who never missed a shift, the kind of man who made her pancakes every Saturday morning, who told her she could be anything she wanted if she worked hard enough. And now, he sat shackled at the defense table, shoulders hunched, looking like a man already condemned. Mina wanted to scream. But no one would listen to a 15-year-old girl. Then, something happened. A forensic analyst took the stand. He spoke about the footprints found at the crime scene, size 11, deep impressions, suggesting the suspect ran up the driveway. Mina's brow furrowed. She had seen the crime scene photos. That driveway had been wet cement the night of the burglary. No footprints could have been left there. She waited, expecting someone to object. Her father's attorney barely stirred. Her heart pounded. No one had caught it. No one was going to say anything. Before she could stop herself, she was on her feet. The words left her mouth before she could even think. "That's a lie." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's gavel banged, demanding silence. But Mina wasn't backing down. She locked eyes with Davis Holloway, whose smirk had disappeared. And then she said the 2 words that sent a shudder through the entire room. Footprint fraud. The reaction was instant. The prosecution team froze. A murmur broke out among the jurors. The judge leaned forward, studying Mina with newfound intensity. "Who are you?" the judge demanded. Mina's voice trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "My name is Mina Carter," she said, "and I can prove my father is innocent." The air crackled with uncertainty. Holloway recovered quickly, his mouth tightening. "Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Bailiff, Bring that young lady forward. Mina swallowed hard as the officer approached. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. But she didn't. She had come too far. She wasn't leaving without a fight. If you were Mina, would you dare to stand up in the middle of the courtroom? Comment below. Silence hung thick in the courtroom. Mina's pulse pounded in her ears, but she kept her back straight, her chin lifted. The judge studied her, expression unreadable. The bailiff held her arm firmly but not aggressively, waiting for orders. Mina swallowed, the weight of the room pressing in on her. Her father, Jonah, sat motionless at the defense table, his face a mixture of shock and something else. Fear. Fear for her. He shook his head slightly, a silent plea for her to stop, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was the only one willing to fight for him. The prosecutor, Davis Holloway, recovered first. He scoffed, adjusting his tie, turning toward the judge. Your Honor, this is wildly inappropriate. We cannot have spectators interrupting proceedings with baseless accusations. I move to have her removed immediately. Mina clenched her fists. Baseless? She had proof. But before she could say anything, the judge finally spoke, her voice steady but firm. Miss Carter, you have just disrupted my courtroom, and you are moments away from being held in contempt. If you have something valuable to say, you'd better make it worth my time. Mina's breath caught. This was her chance. If she blew it, she'd not only be escorted out, but she might also ruin her father's case. Her fingers twitched at her sides. The prosecution's evidence is wrong, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. They claim the suspect ran up the driveway and left footprints in the cement. But that's impossible. The driveway was still wet that night. There couldn't be any prints. A ripple went through the courtroom. Judge Harrington's brow furrowed. And how exactly do you know this? Mina's mind raced. Should she mention that she had snuck into the evidence archives, that she had spent nights scouring files, searching for inconsistencies? She glanced at her father, saw the worry etched in every line of his face. No. She had to be careful. I accessed public records, she said carefully. Crime scene photos from that night. In every single one, the driveway is covered in fresh cement. There's no way anyone could have left footprints there. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Holloway's face before he masked it with his usual arrogance. This is nonsense, he said dismissively. Crime scene photos don't tell the full story. There were partial prints. Then explain how, Mina interrupted, heart racing. Explain how footprints could appear in a surface that wasn't even solid yet. The murmurs in the room grew louder. The judge raised a hand for silence. Mr. Holloway, she said, her voice edged with irritation, do you have an explanation for this? Holloway hesitated. Mina knew then that he didn't. He hadn't expected to be challenged, let alone by a teenager. Jonah's defense attorney, Margaret O'Connell, finally spoke up, her voice hesitant. Your Honor, if there is photographic evidence contradicting the prosecution's claims, it should at least be reviewed. Holloway shot her a glare. Mina clenched her fists. Why was Jonah's own lawyer acting like she was afraid of pushing too hard? Judge Harrington sighed, rubbing her temples. Miss Carter, do you have these photos with you? Mina's stomach clenched. She didn't. But she knew exactly where they were. She had saved them on her phone, had printed them, and kept them in a folder in her backpack. Her backpack, which was currently in the hallway outside the courtroom. A lump formed in her throat. She had come so close. Holloway smirked, sensing victory. It would appear Miss Carter is wasting our time after all. Mina's nails dug into her palms. She had to act fast. Give me 5 minutes, she blurted. I can get them. The judge exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. She glanced at the clock, then at Mina. You have 3, she said. And if you're lying, I will not be pleased. Mina turned and bolted. She burst through the courtroom doors, nearly colliding with a security guard, but she didn't stop. Her bag was just outside where she had left it before sneaking in. She grabbed it, unzipped it with shaking hands, and fumbled for the folder. Her heart nearly stopped. It wasn't there. Panic seized her. She dumped the entire contents of her bag onto the marble floor. Notebooks, pens, a half-eaten protein bar. No folder. No. She had it this morning. She was sure of it. Her breath came fast and shallow. Someone had taken it. A flash of movement caught her eye. A figure disappearing around the corner. A man. Broad shoulders, dark suit. Holloway? No, someone else. Someone she didn't recognize. But whoever he was, he had her folder. Mina's pulse thundered. She didn't have time to think. She took off after him. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floors as she sprinted through the courthouse corridors. The man was fast, weaving through the crowd effortlessly. She pushed herself harder, dodging people, ignoring the shouted protests of security guards. He reached a stairwell and disappeared down it. Mina didn't hesitate. She nearly tripped as she took the steps two at a time, her lungs burning. The stairwell emptied into a dimly lit hallway, empty, except for a single door swinging shut at the far end. She charged forward, slammed into it. Inside was a small office, shelves stacked with files. The man stood by a desk, her folder in his hands. He looked up, startled. Mina didn't think. She lunged. They struggled, the folder slipping between them. Mina fought with everything she had, but he was stronger. Then, footsteps. Loud, approaching fast. The man cursed under his breath. He shoved her back, bolted for the side door. Mina barely caught herself. She turned breathless as two security guards rushed in. She pointed. "He took my evidence." The guards didn't hesitate. One followed the man. The other turned to Mina. "You okay?" She nodded, chest heaving. Then she looked down. The folder was still there. Heart racing, she snatched it up, turned on her heel, and ran back toward the courtroom. She had lost time. She had no idea if the judge would even let her back in, but she wasn't giving up now. Not when she was this close. Mina has two options. A, keep fighting, or B, accept the truth. What would you choose? Drop your answer below. Mina sprinted back through the courthouse, her breath ragged. The folder clutched so tightly in her hands that her fingers ached. She didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5, maybe too long. The moment she reached the heavy double doors of the courtroom, she skidded to a halt. Two bailiffs stood in front of them, arms crossed, their expressions stony. "You're not allowed back in," one of them said. Mina's stomach dropped. "I have the evidence." She gasped. "The photos the judge asked for." The guards didn't move. Inside, she could hear voices. The trial was still going. She had missed her window. No, she couldn't have come this far just to fail. She turned to the nearest bailiff. "Please," she begged, forcing herself to stand taller. "Judge Harrington told me to get these. If I don't get in there, an innocent man is going to prison." The guard hesitated. The other one sighed, exchanging a look with him. Then, slowly, he reached for the door handle. Mina didn't wait. She pushed through the doors the second they cracked open. Inside, the courtroom was still. Holloway was mid-sentence, standing at the prosecution's table, but he stopped speaking the moment the door swung wide and Mina stepped forward, holding up the folder. The entire room turned to look at her. Jonah's eyes widened. The judge narrowed hers. Holloway looked livid. Mina forced herself to take a deep breath. "I have the proof." The silence stretched, thick with tension. Holloway was the first to react. "Your Honor, we cannot allow this ridiculous." Judge Harrington raised a hand, cutting him off. "Miss Carter, approach the bench." Mina moved quickly, her sneakers whispering against the polished floor. She handed the folder to the judge, her heart hammering against her ribs as Harrington flipped it open. Seconds passed. The judge's expression didn't change, but the flick of her eyes across the photographs told Mina everything. She was paying attention. Then, slowly, the judge turned to Holloway. "Do you have an explanation for this?" Holloway cleared his throat. His usual arrogance flickered, just for a moment. Then he straightened his tie and forced a smirk. "These images don't prove anything. The footprints were still found." "In cement that had not hardened," the judge interrupted. "Meaning the prosecution's forensic analysis was flawed at best, intentionally misleading at worst." Mina's chest tightened. She wasn't a lawyer, but she knew what those words meant. Holloway opened his mouth, then closed it. He was scrambling. She could see it. Jonah's attorney, Margaret O'Connell, stood, her voice firmer than before. "Your Honor, given this new evidence, I move to have the footprint testimony struck from the record." Judge Harrington didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her. Then she exhaled. Motion granted. Mina's knees nearly gave out. The weight of everything hit her all at once. She had done it. Holloway wasn't finished, though. "This doesn't change the fact that Mr. Carter was in possession of stolen property," he said quickly. "And as I was about to present to the jury, we have evidence that suggests a motive." Mina's stomach twisted. She had barely won one battle. The war wasn't over. Holloway turned back to the jury, regaining his momentum. The defendant has a history of financial instability, he said smoothly. Bank records show he withdrew money in unusual increments, a pattern often seen in gambling addictions. It is more than plausible that Mr. Carter resorted to theft to cover his debts. Jonah stiffened. Mina's nails dug into her palms. He was twisting everything again. She could see the jury reacting. A few shifted in their seats. Some nodded slightly. The prosecution was good. Too good. Judge Harrington glanced toward O'Connell. Does the defense have a response? O'Connell hesitated. Mina felt her heart sink. She didn't have one. No, that wasn't possible. There had to be something. Then it hit her. She turned back toward the judge, her voice ringing through the room. That's not true. Another ripple of whispers. The judge turned toward her, an eyebrow arched. Miss Carter, you are dangerously close to overstepping. I know, Mina said quickly, but I can prove it. Judge Harrington sighed. Then you'd better do it fast. Mina turned, locking eyes with her father. Dad, she said, her voice softer now but still firm, tell them why you withdrew the money. Jonah hesitated. The entire courtroom was watching him. His fingers curled against the table. Then he exhaled and looked up. It was for Mina. Holloway scoffed. How convenient. It's true, Jonah interrupted, his voice louder now, stronger. I withdrew the money to pay for a private math tutor. Mina was struggling in school and I didn't want her to fall behind. I would never, never steal from anyone. I was just trying to take care of my daughter. Silence. Mina swallowed hard. The tension in the room had shifted. Jonah wasn't a criminal. He was a father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter. For the first time, she saw doubt creep into the jurors' expressions. Holloway's jaw tensed. He knew he was losing them. The judge sighed and turned toward the jury. We will take a recess before continuing. She slammed her gavel down. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Mina turned toward her father. Their eyes met, and for the first time in months, she saw something in them she hadn't seen before. Hope. She had bought him time, but she knew it wasn't over yet. Not even close. Do you think Mina should trust the warning, or keep digging? Share your thoughts. Mina sat outside the courtroom, her knee bouncing, her hands gripping the folder so tightly she could feel the edges pressing into her skin. The hallway buzzed with voices. Attorneys murmuring in low tones, reporters whispering updates into their phones, bailiffs pacing in steady, measured steps. But to Mina, it all blurred into a single hum. She had done everything she could. She had presented the evidence, forced the judge to reconsider the prosecution's case, and at least for now, kept her father from being railroaded into a guilty verdict. But it wasn't enough. Holloway wasn't backing down. He was a man who lived for victories, and he wasn't going to let a teenager ruin his record. The door to the courtroom opened. She shot up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the tile. Her father walked out first, hands still shackled, flanked by officers. Their eyes met. He gave her a small, tired smile. O'Connell followed, looking more frazzled than ever, shuffling through her notes. Mina took a step toward her. What now? The attorney barely glanced at her. Recess is over in 20 minutes. Holloway's going to push harder. He's shifting focus to the stolen jewelry. Mina swallowed. That was the part of the case she still hadn't figured out. The evidence against Jonah wasn't strong, just one velvet pouch found in his trunk, but it was enough to cast suspicion. He had no explanation for how it got there, and without a better alternative, the jury could still see him as guilty. I need to talk to Cassie, Mina muttered. O'Connell frowned. Who? Mina didn't answer. She was already moving, weaving through the crowd, scanning the hall for a familiar face. She found her near the stairwell. Cassie Patel, investigative journalist for the Atlanta Tribune, leaning against the wall, typing furiously into her phone. Cassie glanced up as Mina approached. You caused quite the scene in there, she said, smirking. Nice work. Mina didn't have time for compliments. You said you were looking into the stolen jewelry, right? Did you find anything? Cassie tucked her phone into her pocket, her smirk fading. Maybe. There's a guy, Terry Nolan, small-time crook, in and out of lockup. He bragged online about flipping stolen goods a few days after the burglary. Mina's heart pounded. Does he know my dad? Cassie shrugged. That's the thing. There's no record of them ever crossing paths. If Terry planted that jewelry, it wasn't personal. He needed a scapegoat, and your dad's car was just convenient. Convenient. The word made Mina's stomach turn. Jonah's entire life had been upended, and it was just convenient for someone else. Cassie handed her a slip of paper. That's his last known address. Southside. Not exactly a friendly neighborhood. Mina knew what she was suggesting. She also knew what her father would say. Don't go looking for trouble. But trouble had already found them. Before she could second-guess herself, she turned, heading toward the stairwell. Cassie grabbed her wrist. Whoa, whoa. You're not seriously thinking of going now, are you? I don't have a choice, Mina shot back. Recess is almost over. If I don't get something concrete now, my dad might not get another chance. Cassie hesitated, then sighed. Fine, but you're not going alone. Minutes later, they were in Cassie's car, weaving through traffic. Mina's hands were clammy against her lap. She kept replaying her father's expression in her mind, tired but proud. He didn't know she was about to do something reckless. Cassie pulled onto a cracked, uneven street lined with boarded-up houses and graffiti-covered storefronts. This is it. Mina scanned the buildings, her pulse quickening. Which one? Cassie pointed to a dingy apartment complex at the end of the block. Mina exhaled sharply. Stay here. Cassie raised an eyebrow. Not happening. Mina didn't argue. They climbed out together. The air smelled like gasoline and fried food, and the ground was littered with crushed beer cans and cigarette butts. A group of guys stood near the entrance, watching them approach. Mina squared her shoulders, walking straight past them. She had no idea what she was doing. No plan. No backup. Just desperation. Cassie knocked on the apartment door. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. The door cracked open an inch. A pair of bloodshot eyes peered out. What? Mina stepped forward before Cassie could speak. Terry Nolan? The door started to close. Mina shoved her foot into the gap. I just want to talk, she said quickly. I know you were involved in the Brookhaven burglary. I know you sold the jewelry. The door stopped. Terry's eyes darted between them. I don't know what you're talking about. Mina's heart pounded. She was running out of time. Then why'd you brag about it online? His face darkened. You got proof? Cassie pulled out her phone, scrolling fast, then held it up. Right here. Made a sweet deal on some ice this week. Easy money. Terry cursed under his breath. Mina pressed harder. You framed my dad, didn't you? Stashed the jewelry in his car? Terry hesitated. For the first time, Mina saw something flicker in his expression. Guilt. Cassie took a step closer. Look, man, we don't care about you. We care about the truth. If you say nothing, an innocent guy goes to prison. But if you talk, we might be able to help you. Terry's jaw clenched. He exhaled sharply. I didn't frame anyone, he muttered. I was told to do it. Mina froze. Terry shook his head. You don't want to know. Mina grabbed his arm. I need to know. Terry glanced down the hallway, then back at her. Someone high up, cops, maybe even a DA. It was all arranged. They needed a fall guy, so they picked your old man. Mina's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a robbery. This was bigger. What would you do next if you were Mina? Drop your thoughts below, and if you're loving this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The truth is only getting darker. Mina's breath caught in her throat. The air in the cramped apartment hallway suddenly felt too thin. Terry Nolan shifted uncomfortably, his bloodshot eyes darting toward the peeling walls as if they could somehow protect him from what he'd just admitted. This was planned. Mina's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a knife. Terry exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. I shouldn't have said anything. Cassie stepped forward, lowering her voice. You don't get to drop a bomb like that and walk away. Who told you to do it? Terry's jaw tensed. I don't know names, just that someone high up wanted your dad to take the fall. Cops don't usually care about cases like this, but this time, they were all over it. Mina's stomach churned. The police had barely looked for another suspect. They had taken one tip, found one piece of jewelry, and decided her father was guilty. Now she knew why. Terry grabbed the door, ready to slam it shut. Look, I already said too much. I'm done talking. Mina's desperation turned to fire. You're done? My dad is sitting in a courtroom about to go to prison for something he didn't do, and you're done? Terry hesitated. Cassie seized the moment. You're already in deep, she said. You think they'll let you walk free? If they set up Jonah, what makes you think they won't do the same to you? A muscle in Terry's jaw twitched. He knew they were right. Mina stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "Help me." Terry swallowed hard, then exhaled. "There's a guy," he muttered. "Works downtown. Used to be a cop but got out. I don't know what he does now, but I know he was the one making the calls. Name's Vic Garrison." Mina glanced at Cassie. The name meant nothing to her, but from the way Cassie's expression darkened, she knew it meant something. Terry backed into his apartment, his hand on the doorframe. "That's all I got." The door slammed shut. Mina's pulse pounded in her ears. Cassie grabbed her arm, already pulling her back toward the car. "We need to get back to the courthouse. Now." The drive was a blur of honking horns and blinding sunlight. Mina barely noticed. The name Vic Garrison bounced around her head like a grenade with the pin pulled. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone with enough power to decide her father was guilty before the trial even started. Cassie parked 2 blocks away, avoiding the press gathering outside the courthouse steps. As they approached, Cassie muttered, "Garrison was internal affairs, took down dirty cops, but then he just vanished. No one talks about him." Mina's hands clenched into fists. "We need proof." Cassie hesitated. "Maybe, but we don't have time. You need to get inside before they lock you out." Mina didn't wait. She ran. The moment she stepped through the heavy courtroom doors, she knew she was in trouble. Holloway stood at the prosecution's table, speaking to the jury in his smooth, calculated tone. "The defense would have you believe that Jonah Carter was in the wrong place at the wrong time, that he was simply a victim of bad luck." Mina slid into her seat, breathless. Holloway continued, pacing slightly. "But let's consider the facts. He was caught with stolen jewelry. He has no reasonable explanation for how it got there." Mina clenched her fists. "And most importantly," Holloway added, turning toward the jury, "his own daughter has done nothing but disrupt these proceedings with wild accusations and emotional outbursts." Mina's blood ran cold. He was coming after her. Judge Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Holloway, are you implying that Miss Carter is being dishonest?" Holloway gave a small, calculated smile. "Not dishonest, Your Honor, just misled." Jonah stiffened. Mina saw the way his hands curled into fists. He wasn't angry at Holloway. He was angry at himself for not being able to protect her from this. Mina stood. "Your Honor, I have new information." Holloway sighed. "Of course she does." Mina ignored him. "The jewelry wasn't my dad's. It was planted there by someone working under orders." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Harrington leaned forward. "Do you have evidence to support this claim?" Mina hesitated. "Not yet." Holloway chuckled under his breath. "Then this is another desperate distraction. Your Honor, I request that we move forward with closing arguments." Mina's chest tightened. The judge turned back to her. "Miss Carter, unless you can present something substantial, I cannot allow any further disruptions." Mina's mind spun. She had the name. She had a lead. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Cassie slipped into the seat beside her, her phone glowing. A single text message flashed across the screen. "Got something. Meet me outside." Mina turned to the judge, her heart racing. "I just need time." Judge Harrington sighed, rubbing her temples. 5 minutes. That's all." Mina grabbed Cassie's arm and bolted for the doors. The second they stepped outside, a man was waiting. Older, graying hair, a face lined with stories no one wanted to hear. He held up a manila envelope. "You, Mina Carter?" She hesitated, then nodded. He handed her the envelope. "This is about Vic Garrison. Someone's been cleaning up his messes for years. If your dad got caught up in one, you might not like what you find." Mina's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. Cassie whispered, "Who are you?" The man gave a sad smile. "Someone who tried to do the right thing a long time ago." And then he walked away. Mina flipped open the envelope. Inside was a list of names, records, payments, and at the very top, underlined in ink, Jonah Carter. Her father had been targeted from the beginning. She turned back toward the courthouse, her pulse hammering. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. This was about bringing them down. Mina's fingers tightened around the envelope as her heart pounded in her ears. The weight of it, the significance of what it contained, made her hands shake. Inside was proof that her father had been set up from the very beginning. This wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. Someone powerful had made sure Jonah Carter took the fall. Cassie hovered beside her, her eyes scanning the list of names. "Mina," This is bigger than just your dad. Mina swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. We have to take this inside. Cassie hesitated. Think about this. If the people behind this are dangerous enough to plant evidence, they won't just roll over because we wave some paperwork in their faces. Mina's pulse hammered. Cassie was right. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. Every second wasted was another second Holloway spent convincing the jury her father was guilty. She turned on her heel and rushed back toward the courtroom doors. The bailiffs barely had time to react as she pushed inside. Judge Harrington, already irritated from earlier disruptions, looked up in clear frustration. Miss Carter, I gave you 5 minutes. You are out of time. Mina didn't flinch. Your Honor, I have new evidence. Real evidence. Holloway's eyes narrowed. This is getting ridiculous. Mina ignored him and strode straight to the defense table, handing the envelope to O'Connell. The woman flipped it open, her brows knitting together as she scanned the pages. Her eyes darted back to Mina in shock. Harrington sighed, rubbing her temples. What exactly am I looking at? O'Connell hesitated, then cleared her throat. Your Honor, this appears to be a set of internal documents detailing individuals who were deliberately targeted for prosecution. She flipped a page, her expression darkening. Mina Carter's name is at the top of the list. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Holloway stood, his expression carefully neutral. This is absurd. There's no way that document is legitimate. Cassie, now standing in the back of the room, spoke up. It came from a former officer who worked with Vic Garrison. He's been covering up false arrests for years. Harrington's gaze snapped to Holloway. Mr. Holloway, do you have an explanation? For the first time, he didn't have a response ready. His jaw tightened. Your Honor, I have no knowledge of this, and frankly, I find it highly suspicious that a teenager managed to obtain this so-called evidence in the middle of a trial. O'Connell stood, her voice gaining strength. Your Honor, if this document is real, it changes everything. We need to pause the trial and verify its contents. Mina held her breath. This was it. Harrington stared at the papers, then exhaled. Court is adjourned for the rest of the day. I will personally review this document. If I find anything suspect, we will proceed as planned. If this information holds weight, she turned toward Holloway, her gaze sharp, then we may need to have a very different conversation. The gavel banged. The courtroom emptied in a flurry of voices and movement. Mina barely had time to process what had just happened before her father was led away again. Their eyes met. This time, there was something different in his expression. Hope. Cassie pulled her aside as the last of the reporters trickled out. We did it, she said, but her voice was cautious. Mina let out a shaky breath. Not yet. Harrington could still decide to ignore it. Cassie hesitated. Maybe, but something tells me this mess is too big to sweep under the rug. Mina wanted to believe that. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the courthouse steps. Mina barely had time to process the moment before her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and felt her stomach drop at the message on the screen. Unknown number. You should have left it alone. A cold chill ran down her spine. Cassie peeked at the phone over her shoulder. Tell me that's not as bad as it looks. Mina's fingers clenched around the device. It's worse, Cassie exhaled. They know we're onto them. Mina glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of the people lingering on the street. Any one of them could be watching, following, waiting. Her heart pounded as another message popped up. Unknown number. Walk away, Mina, before it's too late. Her grip tightened. Too late for who? She had fought too hard, come too far to back down now. But this wasn't just about her anymore. If someone powerful was pulling the strings, if they had the ability to frame her father so easily, what else were they capable of? Cassie's voice was low. We need to be smart about this. Mina nodded, but she already knew the truth. There was no going back. She just had to figure out who was trying to silence her before they succeeded. Mina stared at the message on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. The words glared back at her like a warning carved into stone. You should have left it alone. Cassie leaned in, reading over her shoulder. This isn't some empty threat. Mina exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Someone was watching her. Someone powerful enough to have framed her father and bold enough to threaten her in broad daylight. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could reply, demand to know who they were. But what good would that do? They already had the upper hand. Cassie grabbed her arm. "We need to go somewhere safe." Mina nodded, shoving her phone into her pocket. They moved quickly, slipping past the courthouse crowd, dodging reporters still lingering on the steps. Cassie's car was parked down the block. As soon as they slid inside, Mina locked the doors. Cassie gripped the steering wheel. "We should tell someone." Mina shook her head. "Tell who? The police? What if they're part of this?" Cassie didn't argue. They both knew the truth. Whoever had orchestrated this wasn't working alone. Mina flipped open the manila envelope again, scanning the pages. Jonah Carter's name wasn't the only one on the list. There were others. People who had been arrested under suspicious circumstances, all tied to cases handled by the same group of officers. And one name stood out above the rest. Vic Garrison. Mina tapped the name. "This is our next move," Cassie sighed. "You want to go talk to a guy who helped frame your dad?" "I don't have a choice." Cassie didn't answer for a moment. Then she put the car in drive. The address they had for Garrison led them to an aging apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few beat-up sedans and a rusting pickup truck with one missing headlight. Mina hesitated as they approached the building. "What if he won't talk?" Cassie gave a grim smile. "Then we make him." They reached the door and knocked. No answer. Mina knocked again, harder. Footsteps, then the sound of a lock clicking. The door cracked open an inch, revealing a man in his late 50s, gray hair messy, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. Garrison, his gaze flickered between them. "Who the hell are you?" Mina's pulse pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm Jonah Carter's daughter." Garrison's expression darkened. "Go away." He moved to shut the door, but Cassie stuck her foot in before it could close. "You owe us a conversation." His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're messing with." Mina held up the list. "I know exactly what I'm messing with, and I know you were part of it." Garrison hesitated. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then, finally, he stepped back, opening the door wider. 5 minutes, he muttered. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit and smelled like stale coffee and regret. Papers were stacked haphazardly on the table. Garrison collapsed into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I'm done with this," he said. "I left that world behind." Mina stepped closer. "My dad is on trial for a crime he didn't commit. If you know something, you need to speak up." Garrison let out a humorless laugh. "Speak up? You think I can just talk and everything will be fine?" He shook his head. "You don't get it, kid. There are people in this city who make the rules. You cross them, you disappear." Cassie crossed her arms. "So you're just gonna let an innocent man rot in prison?" He sighed. "I didn't frame your father. I wasn't even in on that job." Mina frowned. "Then who was?" Garrison hesitated. His fingers tapped against the table. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Holloway." Mina's stomach dropped. "The prosecutor?" Garrison nodded. "He's not just a lawyer. He's been working with the cops for years, making sure the right cases go away and the wrong ones stick. Your dad was collateral damage." Mina's breath came short and fast. "Why him?" Garrison rubbed a hand over his face. "Because someone important wanted a conviction, someone high up. Holloway made sure it happened." Mina's heart pounded. If this was true, Holloway wasn't just a prosecutor. He was a puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes. Garrison stood, suddenly restless. "You need to leave. Now." Mina wasn't ready. "We can expose him." "No," Garrison snapped. "You don't get it. Holloway owns this city. How you think you can just take him down with some papers and a courtroom speech?" He exhaled sharply. "Get out while you still can." Mina's hands curled into fists. "I'm not running." Garrison looked at her for a long moment. Then, something in his expression shifted. Maybe he saw the fire in her eyes. Maybe he saw the same determination that had once burned in him. He grabbed a slip of paper from the table and scribbled something on it. "This is the only chance you have." He shoved it into her hands. Mina looked down. A name, a location. Cassie read over her shoulder. "What is this?" Garrison's voice was grim. "A witness. Someone who can prove Holloway is dirty." Mina's breath caught. This could be it. The key to everything. Garrison moved toward the door, already pushing them out. "Don't come back." The door slammed shut behind them. Mina stared at the paper in her hands, her pulse thudding in her ears. Cassie exhaled. "We just kicked the hornet's nest." Mina tucked the slip into her pocket, her jaw set. "Good." She turned toward the car. Let's burn it down. Mina gripped the slip of paper so tightly that the ink smudged beneath her fingers. The name written on it was her next, and possibly last chance to clear her father's name. A witness. Someone who could expose everything. Someone who could bring Holloway down. Cassie kept her eyes on the road as they sped away from Garrison's apartment. Are we going straight there? Mina hesitated. The courthouse was still waiting for her. Judge Harrington had only adjourned the trial for the day, and if she didn't show up with something concrete, Jonah would be left at Holloway's mercy. But if this witness really had proof, she looked at the address again. A small diner on the west side, not far from where she grew up. Yeah, she said, her voice steady. We don't have time to waste. Cassie nodded, pressing harder on the gas. The city blurred past them, neon signs flickering as the sun dipped below the skyline. Mina's phone buzzed again, making her stomach twist. Another unknown number. Another warning? She glanced down. Unknown number. This is your last chance. Walk away. Her grip tightened around the phone. She didn't reply. Cassie saw the look on her face. Same people? Mina nodded. Cassie exhaled. That means we're getting close. 15 minutes later, they pulled into a near-empty parking lot. The diner was a relic from another time. Faded red booths, a flickering neon open sign, and the faint smell of grease hanging in the air. Mina scanned the lot. You see anyone? Cassie shook her head. Let's go. They stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, but only two other people were inside. A waitress behind the counter and an older man sitting alone in the back. Mina's heart skipped. She recognized him. Walter Briggs. She had seen his name before, buried in case files. A retired city worker who had reported something suspicious the night of the robbery. His statement had been ignored. Mina walked toward his booth. The man barely looked up from his coffee, his face lined with years of hard living. You're late, he muttered. Mina slid into the seat across from him. You knew I was coming? Briggs stirred his coffee lazily. Word travels. His eyes flicked to Cassie, then back to Mina. I know why you're here. Mina leaned forward. Then you know my dad is innocent. Briggs sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, kid, I don't want any trouble. Then tell me the truth. He hesitated. Mina's fingers curled into fists. They're threatening me, watching me, and my dad is sitting in a jail cell for something he didn't do. I'm not walking away from this. Briggs stared at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. That night, I saw a man near your dad's car, he said quietly. Didn't think much of it at first. He was tall, wearing a hoodie, messing around near the trunk. Looked like he was in a hurry. Mina's pulse quickened. Did you see his face? Briggs hesitated again, then shook his head. Nah, but I remember something else. A car, black sedan, government plates, parked just down the street. Cassie stiffened. You think it was a cop? Briggs took a slow sip of his coffee. I know it was. Mina's stomach twisted. Briggs leaned back in his seat. I told the cops what I saw, even gave them the plate number. He chuckled bitterly. Guess how much they cared? Mina already knew the answer. Cassie flipped open her notebook. Do you still have the plate number? Briggs pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket and slid it across the table. Cassie scribbled it down. If we can trace this car, we'll know exactly who set Jonah up. Mina looked at Briggs. Will you testify? The older man stiffened. Briggs, please. If you don't come forward, they win. Briggs looked down at his coffee. Kid, these people don't play fair. Mina's voice was quiet but firm. Neither do I. Briggs exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. I'll do it. Mina's breath came fast. She barely had time to process the relief before Cassie's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen and swore under her breath. We need to go. Now. Mina tensed. What? Cassie showed her the screen. A text from an unknown number. They know we're here. Mina's blood ran cold. Briggs paled. You brought them here? No, Cassie said. They were already watching. Outside, headlights flashed across the diner's windows. A black sedan idled in the parking lot. Mina's breath hitched. The same kind of car Briggs had seen the night of the robbery. The waitress by the counter barely looked up as two men in suits stepped inside. They scanned the room, their gazes locking onto Mina and Briggs. Cassie muttered, Tell me you have a back door. Briggs was already standing. This way. They moved fast, slipping past the kitchen. The door slammed open behind them. Mina didn't look back. They burst into the alley behind the diner. Cassie's car was parked just across the lot, but the men were moving fast. Mina's lungs burned as she sprinted. Tires screeched. A second black sedan appeared at the end of the alley. They were boxed in. Briggs cursed. "We need a new plan." Mina scanned the alley, her mind racing. There was only one way out. Her gaze locked onto a fire escape. She grabbed Briggs's arm. "Can you climb?" Briggs hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Cassie was already moving, hauling herself up the rusted ladder. Mina followed, her pulse hammering as voices shouted below them. They had seconds. Mina climbed faster. Cassie reached the rooftop first, yanking Briggs up. Mina pulled herself over the ledge just as a gunshot echoed below. Briggs flinched. Cassie pulled Mina to her feet. "We need to keep moving." Mina's heart pounded as they ran across the rooftops. They weren't just fighting for the truth anymore. They were fighting to survive. What would you do in Mina's place? Run or fight back? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story has you hooked, like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The truth is only getting more dangerous. Mina's lungs burned as she ran across the rooftop, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear the city below. The metal grates clanged beneath her feet, every step a reminder that one wrong move could send her tumbling. Behind her, Briggs wheezed, struggling to keep pace, while Cassie scanned for an escape route. A gunshot cracked through the night. Mina ducked instinctively, her pulse spiking. The men below weren't trying to scare them anymore. They were aiming to kill. Cassie grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the edge. "We have to jump." Mina skidded to a halt. A 5-foot gap separated them from the next building. It wasn't impossible, but one misstep and they'd end up splattered on the pavement. Briggs panted beside her, his face pale. I can't make that." Cassie's eyes darted to the fire escape below, too exposed. Another gunshot ricocheted off the metal railing. Mina's grip on the envelope tightened. She had proof. Real proof that Holloway had orchestrated this. If they got caught, this evidence would vanish, and Jonah would be doomed. No, she wouldn't let that happen. She turned to Briggs. "I'll go first. Then I'll help you across." Before he could protest, she stepped back, took a deep breath, and sprinted forward. The moment her foot left the ledge, gravity pulled at her, the street lights spinning below. For one terrifying second, she thought she had miscalculated. Then her hands slammed against concrete. She scrambled up, her chest heaving. Cassie landed beside her, rolling onto her feet. Briggs stood frozen at the edge of the other building. Below him, the men were shouting, their voices sharp and urgent. "Briggs, you have to jump," Mina yelled. His face twisted in fear. Cassie swore under her breath. "They're coming up." Mina reached out her hand. "Briggs, trust me." He hesitated, then launched himself forward. His foot clipped the edge. Mina lunged, grabbing his wrist just as he slipped. Briggs dangled over the alley, his legs kicking. Mina's arms screamed with effort as she held on. "I got you. Just don't let go." Cassie dropped to her knees, grabbing his other arm. Together they hauled him up, every muscle in Mina's body burning. The second Briggs rolled onto the rooftop, the door behind them burst open. More men, more guns. Cassie grabbed Mina's sleeve. "Run!" They sprinted across the rooftop, cutting through darkness and broken antennas. Mina's legs felt like lead, exhaustion threatening to drag her down. They had to get off this rooftop. Ahead, a rusted ladder led down to a narrow alley. Cassie grabbed it first, sliding down. Mina pushed Briggs forward. "Go, go, go!" The second her feet hit the ground, tires screeched at the mouth of the alley. Headlights flared. Another black sedan. Cassie cursed. "They're everywhere." A door swung open. A man stepped out. Not one of the thugs. Not a hired gun. Holloway. Mina's breath caught. He adjusted his cuffs, stepping toward them like he had all the time in the world. The glow from the streetlights cast sharp shadows across his face. "You've been busy." Cassie shifted, subtly moving in front of Mina. "You don't want to do this here." Holloway smiled, slow and practiced. "You think I care about witnesses?" Briggs exhaled sharply. "You set me up too, didn't you?" Holloway didn't even look at him. Mina's hands clenched into fists. "You framed my dad." Holloway sighed, tilting his head. "Framed?" He chuckled. "No, Mina, I convicted him. That's what I do." Mina's pulse pounded. "You're going to lose." His smile didn't fade. "Am I?" He took another step forward. "You're holding evidence, sure, but do you really think a few papers will be enough?" Cassie's fingers twitched toward her phone, ready to record. Holloway's eyes flicked to her. Go ahead, film me, post it online. You think I don't control what people see, what they believe? Mina's grip on the envelope tightened. Holloway exhaled, almost bored. Let me give you some advice. Drop this. Walk away. Go back to your life while you still have one. Briggs muttered. You wouldn't really? Holloway's expression darkened. Wouldn't I? A car door opened behind him. A second man stepped out, younger, bulkier. Not a cop, someone worse. Mina forced herself to breathe. Cassie nudged her. We need to move. Mina's mind raced. Running wasn't an option. Neither was fighting. But there was one thing she could do. She pulled out her phone. Opened the file. The list of names, payments, and fabricated evidence. Then, before Holloway could react, she hit send. Holloway's face flickered. A crack in his perfect composure. Mina smiled. Guess we'll see who controls the story now. Cassie's phone vibrated. A notification flashed. Upload successful. Briggs exhaled. Jesus? Holloway's jaw tightened. You think this changes anything? Mina stepped forward. It changes everything. For the first time, Holloway didn't have a response. A siren wailed in the distance. He flicked a glance at his watch. Then slowly he stepped back. This isn't over. Mina didn't blink. I know. Holloway slid into the sedan. The door shut, and just like that, he was gone. Cassie let out a shaky laugh. Holy. Mina turned to Briggs. You still willing to testify? He ran a hand down his face. After that? You bet your ass I am. Mina exhaled, the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, she knew how it would end. Would you have hit send or waited for the right moment? Drop a comment below. And if you're loving this, like, subscribe, and stick around, because the fight for justice isn't over yet. Mina's hands were still shaking. The weight of what she had done hadn't fully settled yet, but there was no time to process it. Holloway was gone, but not for long. He wouldn't let this go unanswered. Cassie checked her phone, scrolling through the flood of notifications. It's spreading. Her voice was breathless, equal parts exhilaration and fear. The files are everywhere. News outlets are picking it up. People are asking questions. Briggs let out a low whistle. Damn, kid, you really did it. Mina exhaled, pushing away the dizziness creeping in. Not yet. She turned to Briggs. We have to get back to the courthouse. You need to testify before they try to silence you. Briggs didn't argue. He had seen the look in Holloway's eyes, the kind of controlled fury that didn't just go away. The only way to win now was to take this straight into the courtroom, where Holloway couldn't twist the truth from the shadows. Cassie's car screeched into the courthouse parking lot. The sun had barely started rising, the sky painted in streaks of orange and gray. Mina barely noticed. Every muscle in her body was locked in anticipation. She had spent months clawing for a way to save her father, and now, finally, the moment was here. They moved fast, pushing through the heavy courthouse doors. The air inside was cool and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding outside. Reporters had already started gathering, their voices blending into a murmur of questions and camera flashes. Mina spotted O'Connell near the defense table, shuffling through her notes. She looked up, startled, as Mina stormed toward her. We have a witness, Mina said, breathless. O'Connell's eyes flickered to Briggs, widening. Is this? He saw everything, Mina cut in. And he's willing to testify. For the first time since the trial began, O'Connell looked hopeful. She straightened, adjusting her blazer, then turned toward the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to call a new witness. Judge Harrington peered over her glasses. We adjourned yesterday to verify the documents presented by Miss Carter. And now you're introducing a surprise witness? Holloway sat motionless at the prosecution's table, his face blank, but Mina could see the tension in his jaw. He knew what was coming. O'Connell squared her shoulders. Your Honor, Walter Briggs is prepared to testify that Jonah Carter was framed. A murmur rippled through the room. Holloway slowly rose, buttoning his jacket. Objection. This is a last-minute attempt to derail the prosecution's case. There's no way to confirm the validity of this witness's statement. Judge Harrington held up a hand. I'll decide that, Mr. Holloway. Her gaze shifted to Briggs. Approach the stand. Briggs moved with the slow, careful steps of a man who had carried too many secrets for too long. He settled into the witness chair, cleared his throat, and took the oath. O'Connell stepped forward. Mr. Briggs, can you tell the court what you saw the night of the alleged crime? Briggs exhaled. I was near Carter's car that night. I saw a man at the trunk, moving fast, like he was in a hurry. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the black sedan nearby. Government plates. O'Connell nodded. And what did you do next? I wrote down the plate number and reported it, Briggs said. But nobody followed up. A few days later, I saw the news, Carter arrested. They never even looked at anyone else. Holloway stood. Mr. Briggs, are you claiming law enforcement intentionally ignored your statement? Briggs met his gaze. I'm saying they buried it. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. O'Connell turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this witness's testimony directly contradicts the prosecution's version of events. Along with the files submitted yesterday, it is clear that this case was built on falsified evidence. Judge Harrington's expression was unreadable. Then she looked at Holloway. Mr. Holloway, do you have a response? For the first time, the prosecutor hesitated. Then slowly he shook his head. The air shifted. It was over. Judge Harrington sighed, removing her glasses. Given the evidence presented, this court finds reasonable doubt in the charges against Jonah Carter. She turned toward the defense table. The charges are dismissed. The words hit Mina like a thunderclap. Her father was free. The sound of the gavel striking wood barely registered over the rush of blood in her ears. Jonah sat frozen in his seat, as if his mind hadn't caught up yet. Then he turned, eyes locking onto Mina's. She didn't remember running to him. One second she was sitting, the next she was in his arms, her face buried against his shoulder, sobs racking through her body. I knew you'd come for me, Jonah whispered. Mina tightened her grip. Always. The courtroom exploded into movement, reporters rushing forward, cameras flashing, voices rising in a chaotic wave. Cassie nudged Mina's shoulder. We should get out of here before the real circus starts. They slipped out a side exit, stepping into the sharp morning air. The city felt different now, lighter. The weight that had been pressing on Mina's chest for months had finally lifted. Jonah wrapped an arm around her shoulders. So what now? Mina exhaled, watching as Cassie checked her phone. The files had spread. News outlets were demanding an investigation into Holloway. The system that had nearly swallowed them whole was now starting to crack. She turned to her father. Now? A small smile tugged at her lips. We make sure this never happens again. Jonah chuckled. Sounds like trouble. Mina smirked. You know me. As they walked toward the waiting car, Mina's phone buzzed again. Another message. But this time, it wasn't a threat. Unknown number. You don't know what you've started. Mina glanced back at the courthouse. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Would you stop after clearing your father's name? Or keep fighting to expose everything? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, like, subscribe, and stick around, because some battles are just the beginning. Mina stared at the message on her phone, her pulse steady but her mind racing. You don't know what you've started. A few months ago, those words would have scared her. Now, they only confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't over. Jonah shifted beside her, glancing at the screen. Another threat? She locked the phone and slipped it into her pocket. More like a warning. Cassie let out a low whistle. Guess Holloway's friends aren't too happy. They stood outside the courthouse, the early morning air still thick with the aftershocks of the trial. Reporters swarmed the front steps, hungry for statements, desperate to turn Mina's fight into a headline. She ignored them. The real battle wasn't in front of cameras. It was in the shadows, where the people pulling the strings never showed their faces. Jonah sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You did it, Mina. His voice was thick with something she couldn't quite place. Relief, pride, maybe even guilt for what she had been forced to do. We did it, she corrected. For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing in the reality of freedom. Cassie broke the silence, tapping her phone. The governor's office is demanding a formal investigation. Holloway's going to have a hard time slithering out of this one. Jonah shook his head. He'll try. Mina knew he was right. Holloway wasn't the type to go down quietly. He had spent years twisting the system to his advantage. If they wanted to bring him down completely, they needed more than just a courtroom win. They needed undeniable proof. Cassie tilted her phone toward Mina. And speaking of snakes, look at this. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Holloway resigns amid corruption allegations. Mina's breath caught. Jonah frowned. That was fast. Too fast. Cassie scrolled down. No arrest, no charges, just a resignation. She looked up, her expression dark. He's making a deal. Mina clenched her jaw. Holloway had spent his entire career putting innocent people behind bars. Now, when it was his turn to face justice, he was cutting and running. Jonah exhaled. That's how people like him survive. They leave before they can be dragged down. Mina wasn't satisfied. Where is he now? Cassie typed fast, searching. Then she paused. Her expression shifting. No official statement, no press conference, just gone. A pit formed in Mina's stomach. Holloway had vanished. Jonah gave her shoulder a squeeze. Mina, it's over. Let it go. She wanted to. She really did. But deep down, she knew the truth. Holloway wasn't the only one. He was just one piece of a much larger machine. If she walked away now, it would keep turning. Someone else would take his place. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, it wasn't a threat. Unknown number. You want the rest of the truth? Follow the money. She stared at the words, the weight of them settling deep in her chest. Jonah watched her carefully. Mina? She turned the screen toward him. His expression darkened. Cassie let out a slow breath. Looks like someone wants you to keep digging. A few months ago, Mina might have ignored it. She might have told herself that she had done enough, that saving her father was all that mattered. But she knew better now. She had seen firsthand how the system worked, how easy it was to bury the truth under paperwork and corruption. Holloway may have been exposed, but that didn't mean justice had won. Jonah studied her, a mix of pride and worry in his eyes. You're not done, are you? Mina closed her phone and met his gaze. No. Cassie chuckled, shaking her head. I figured. Jonah sighed but didn't argue. Instead, he pulled her into a hug, holding on a little longer than usual. Just be careful. Mina swallowed hard. I will. Cassie clapped her hands together. All right then, let's track down some dirty money. Jonah groaned. I can already tell this is going to get messy. Mina smiled. Yeah, but that's how we fix things. She looked up at the courthouse one last time, then turned away. This wasn't just about her father anymore. This was about all the people who didn't have someone to fight for them. She wasn't walking away. She was just getting started.